In this episode, we'll be taking a look at some of the first large IDP best ball drafts of the offseason. These drafts featured some of the analysts that you know and love and some of the sharpest drafters out there. Using information from these drafts, we'll be taking a look at early DL and LB strategies, how to value dual Desi players, what the market thinks of some 2024 breakouts, where the DBs are going, and how early they are. Welcome to IDP Drafts. All right, welcome in to another great installment of IDP Drafts. We're here breaking down some drafts and seeing what we liked and what we didn't like and what we're taking and what direction we're going with it. And I am more than thrilled. I'm trying to find the right word. I was told we couldn't sing the reunited song because of, copyright payment types of things, but we are reunited and it does feel excellent. Jake, back on the show, my co-host. How you doing, man?
Scott, I couldn't think of a place I'd rather be than right here, right now, getting ready to talk about some of our favorite insights from IDP drafts, and hanging out with you, sir, just chopping it up, talking ball. I mean, again, not a better place in the world right now.
Yeah, and we're together in these streets. So we're going to be talking about 3 drafts tonight. 2 are ongoing. One, Jake and I are right next to each other, so that's been a lot of fun at times. I've taken some of his Texans, he's taken some of my Bengals. We've exchanged some words in DMs about some of those. But we've been doing these and been having a blast. So in addition to the D-up drafts that we've done and we talked about last episode with Josh and I, Jake has done a lot of those D-up drafts too. They're a lot of fun. But there's something special about these large format, 28, 32, 36 round drafts where you're really getting into the weeds. You're really testing that deep IDP knowledge. And it also leads to a lot of interesting conversations that have implications for not just best ball, but redraft as we start to get more into redraft season and how we're thinking about these players and strategies. So, man, I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you talking about this. And one of the first things we wanted to talk about, because it's always top of mind whenever you're doing any kind of IDP draft, but especially a best ball draft, and that is what to do in the early rounds. We know it's defensive linemen or linebackers. We don't see many DBs go in the early rounds. So, Jake, when you're thinking about these first couple of rounds, and when you're looking at how the first couple of rounds have unfolded in these 3 drafts, what are you thinking?
So for me, I really, really love to try to maximize the value of that first pick, even into the second round a little bit, but really, especially in that first round, and really lock in those as close to as sure things as we feel like we can get when it comes to that defensive line scoring, right? So you're talking about your heavy hitters, your Nick Bosa, your Micah Parsons, your Max Crosby, right? These guys that are just going to deliver incredible value in terms of snaps, floor, their ceiling, everything, and we want to lock those in early. One, because of obviously what they deliver, but two, they really are a premium, and we don't see a lot of that type of value or consistency or certainty throughout the early rounds. And once we get past that, linebackers can dry up pretty fast. Whether
Mhm.
that's guys we feel are premium again, those elite of the elite we are sitting at the top of our boards every year, as well as just the guys who are the people who we can feel confident about are going to be in there for the vast majority of the season as well. And a lot of that can play into the numbers of things, right? Like generally each team only has 2 starting linebackers that we can really feel confident about for the most of the year, whereas defensive line, no, we can feel a little more comfortable about 3 to 4 defensive linemen per team, and then based on rotations and other things, there's really kind of just a pure numbers game in that respect. But so when we looked at it, what stood out to me is like the anchor DL or hero DL strategy, right? Where, we hear these types of terminology for running backs and other drafts where it's like, get that stud early, and then let's start hammering some linebackers so we can build out a really solid core of linebacker from a very, I think, overall shallow pool.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And we've seen these drafts starting to play out very DL heavy. It seems like a lot of people are going, DL early and often. I shouldn't just say early. And looking at the results of the first draft that are completed, it's Parsons, Watt, Bosa, Anderson, Hutchinson, Crosby. It's all edges going in those first couple of picks. But when you look at a lot of builds, you don't really start seeing teams with two or three middle linebackers or off-ball linebackers as a very common build through those first four rounds. You're seeing a lot of emphasis on DL sort of at the exclusion of linebackers. And that's not what I think we want to do, because you mentioned there is that relative scarcity. I'm fine taking an awesome DL in that very first round, but if I'm picking around 11 or 12, I'm not just going to take the 11th or best or 12th best defensive lineman. I might take that LB1 at that point, because the market does dry up a little bit more quickly for LBs, as you mentioned. So even on a platform like Sleeper, where you have some dual designation players, some players who have both that linebacker and defensive line eligibility, it still is something that wants to push me more towards LB early, like maybe not the first round, but rounds. I like to walk away with probably four or so middle linebackers after the first 6 or 7 rounds. Because when you look at those positional designations, we have about 96 NFL starters that have an LB designation, because every real middle linebacker gets a linebacker designation in Sleeper. And then about half of the edges get an LB/DL. And then there's a whole bunch of edges and defensive ends out there that only have a DL designation. And I think a lot of it depends on what team they play for, because really, if you look at where they're lining up at about the same places. But if you think about it using that parameter, you got about 96 starters with a linebacker designation, 128 starters with a defensive line designation. So what that means is that market is going to dry up a lot more quickly. And that's making some big assumptions. Like there are two viable middle off ball linebackers for every NFL team, which we know there aren't. But still, there's a lot there that pushes me towards wanting to have some LBs early. So I think we're in some good agreement there. But I don't know. How have you thought about how your actual builds have played out in those early rounds?
So it's funny because in best ball one, I went very DL heavy, right? The board kind of fell that way to me, which is another thing, right? That you play into all the considerations that we're looking at here, that you don't just force linebacker, like to say, I need to get linebackers now. If DL talent is dropping to you, you take that best player, right? In that given situation. But in general, I took that approach with the IDP best ball one, and I walked away a little disappointed overall in my roster and just what it looked like. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously anything can happen, but as we got into combined best ball two, I just took a little more measured approach, looking at that feedback, that introspection from draft one, and I don't know. I really like where I'm sitting here now. I think we're about into round 20 or so almost. And I just feel a lot more
Mm-hmm.
confident about the strength of that team to perform over the length of the entire year.
Yeah, I feel the same as you. I drafted only two, I guess three real true three down linebackers in my first 7 picks in best ball one. And I didn't feel as good about that as I do in best ball two, where I got Crosby. I got that, anchor defensive lineman as my top pick. But then I have Cashman. I sort of alternated with Benito, and then Logan Wilson, and then Walker, and then Peyton Wilson and Jermaine Pratt. So I walked away with 5 linebackers after 7 rounds, and that feels a lot better, especially as we look, like you said, we're around 21 of that draft right now. There are still some DL that are gonna get snaps. I'm not gonna name names because I want them and I don't want you to take them. This is the draft where we're back to back. But there are lots of viable defensive linemen still there. There are no viable linebackers unless you have a crystal ball and know that an injury is coming and you're getting a backup that's going to end up seeing a bunch of snaps. So I think that it is smart to get one of those stud defensive linemen early, but I think it's important to focus a lot on the linebackers, especially when you think about this dual designation wiggle. And whenever we think about this dual desi, it's a debate every year about how much we need to factor dual desi into our decision making, if we should, if we shouldn't. And I know this is a place where we differ a little bit in terms of the relative value we place on it, and also depending on the format of the draft. So for me, when I think about IDP only, I don't really care that much about dual desi. A big part of that is just the numbers of it. We have 32 rounds, so I'm going to walk away with 10 plus of every position. So if I happen to have some good players that can score points for me at linebacker or at defensive lineman, then great. That's kind of a bonus, I suppose. But I'm not going to take someone that I think is a worse player, even a marginally worse player, because they have that dual desi. The big exception to that for me is in the combined best ball drafts. So when we think about the offense and IDP best ball drafts that we do, it's only 36 roster spots. And so you only have 16 bench spots for both your offense and defense. That means you have 8 bench spots for defense if you want to, play it completely equally. The fact that you can get dual desi guys there allows you more flexibility to hammer offense more often and even earlier in the draft, because it dries up more quickly. There are 5 players on offense that can score on any given play. There are 11 players on defense that can score on any given play. So you need to be overdrafting offense. But dual desi helps you to even imbalance that a little bit more. It makes it so you don't have to take quite as many defensive players to have some versatility in that build. So when we think about those combined best ball drafts, I am a lot more prone to focus in on dual desi, but it seems like the market hasn't necessarily caught up to that yet. In looking at the top 24 IDP picks from combined best ball one, and best ball two, which were IDP only, in best ball one, there were 9 dual desi players taken in those first 2 rounds, essentially. Best ball two, there were 7 dual desi players taken. In combined best ball one, there was 9. So it was the same level as what we would have expected from the IDP only, but it didn't go up like I expected it to. And again, these were among the top 24 IDP picks. No IDP were picked earlier than I think round 8 or 9, I think is when the seal was broken in that draft. So
Yeah.
the market isn't really catching up to this, or maybe it's just my strategy and the market will never catch up to it, and I'll just keep doing it and hopefully profit from it. But that's one of the things that I've really been focusing in on and noticing when it comes to dual desi players getting pushed up the board and where they're at in my decision making process. And again, it's much more heavily factored in when I think about those combined drafts. But Jake, how do you approach dual desi players? Are they a real Kickstarter for you? Are they a deal breaker if they don't have it? Are they a tiebreaker if it's even players? I know there's lots of different ways to approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely account for it. I would say I lean into it more heavily as a tiebreaker, right? I don't ever want to have game theory guide me over what I see on the field in terms of, actual performances by the players, or what I can kind of ascertain analytically based on other statistical measures. So all that said, right, if I have guys that we're talking 51-49 type of thing, I can definitely be
Mm-hmm.
swayed into the 49% option or confidence if there is the dual designation. Even in the ones like where you talked about, right, there is a greater bench, so really there isn't as much of a need for that flexibility in terms of your best ball scoring or roster construction. But I think maybe I'm living in a little bit of my own past, right? Anecdotally, I've built some teams where I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And then I look at them at week 10 and I'm like, I'm starting like 6 of the 8 guys here because I got so many guys who are hurt. And you just kind of get pigeonholed into that because maybe you don't have the dual designation thing. So I it could be a little bit of my own history coming up to impact me in that way. But I could not agree with you more when it comes to a narrowed bench like we do an experience in the combined best balls. So I started my very first dynasty best ball league last year, and it's exactly that, right? Like I hammered so many dual desi on the IDP side because I mean just
Mhm.
exactly that. I made a point of getting Taysom Hill on my roster because it was a super flex one, and Taysom Hill had
Mhm.
the quarterback tight end
Yep.
designation, right? Like because the league just wanted shallow benches, right? And which isn't right or wrong. It's just what the league wants. And if it's what the league wants as a majority, it's the right answer. So needless to say,
Mhm.
that's what we did. And so I did that, and I experienced a lot of profit from that, I think, in the first half of the season. And then again, I was just hammered by the injury bug last year. So unfortunately it didn't play out as a full strategy for me. But that's really where I land on it. So I think we're maybe a little bit closer in some aspects of it, but I will definitely say the biggest takeaway from this, from my thing to those listening, don't let it be a decision maker for you. Let it be a variable in the equation to help you make that decision.
Yeah, and let the record show, let the drafts show that Jake is a man of integrity. Because I was just looking back at some of your drafts, and you took guys like Montez Sweat and Josh Sweat. You took Josh Sweat in both of the best ball drafts over some guys like Jalen Phillips or a Will McDonald or a Chop Robinson who had those dual desi, because I'm guessing you think they are head and shoulders above. It wasn't a thing where it was either one. So you're comfortable
Yeah.
taking some of those DL only over the guys with dual desi if you think the talent is clearly there. All right. Well, other than the great and never ending dual desi debate, another thing that frequently comes up is breakouts. So there are players every single year. We talked about them a few episodes ago, breakouts and busts and players coming back from injuries. And we talked about in our very first episode together just how we think about injuries and taking insights from the ADP from last year's drafts. So I think one thing that people have a really keen interest in is linebacker breakouts. Linebackers are still the lifeblood of IDP, especially if you are a casual player, especially if you're doing a lot of these fast draft, D up drafts where linebackers, I'm working on a draft guide right now, and heavy linebacker seems like it can be a very, very useful strategy there. But given the prominent role of linebackers, Jake, I know you wanted to talk about some of those 2024 breakout linebackers and where they're being drafted in these early best ball drafts.
Yeah, I really, it's always fascinates me. I find that linebackers tend to have a lot more variance than we'd like to admit, especially when we get outside of some of the Fred Warners of the world, right? Where they're just locked in. They play 1,000 snaps every year. They're a top 12 IDP scorer every year, right? But outside of that, we tend to just see again significant variance. So what happens when we have these breakouts? We have the Zach Bond, who just has a stellar season. Edgerrin Cooper, who just has a tremendous run at the end of the year and into the fantasy playoffs. Caden Ellis is fully realized. Jamie and Sherwood comes out of nowhere, right? And then gets a contract extension. So where do all these people land, right? And how do we respond to that? And how do we, I guess, play that accordingly when it comes to these drafts? And right, so you look at someone like a Zach Bond, last year, undrafted in a lot of the leagues. Maybe towards the end of the offseason when it seemed like he had a better shot to maybe win a job there in Philadelphia. Now we're looking at 111 and 2-3. So we're talking end of first round. This guy is going, right, like that big of a jump. Do we feel strongly that he can keep delivering at that level? Edgerrin Cooper, at the end of the second round, 210, 212. Caden Ellis, middle of the third, 3-4, 3-6 were his positions for these two drafts. Jamie and Sherwood, a little bit of variance here, the 6-7 and 4-2. But still, I mean, that's these are big jumps from where all these guys were last year. Um, do we have confidence in any of these guys? Now, I think some of them we can maybe feel a little more confident in. I think guys like
Mhm.
Edgerrin Cooper are ones that I have a little bit more confidence in. Well, one, our good friend of the show, Mike Woolert, he has a lot of confidence in him, and he talks about it pretty constantly in the Slack channel. But besides that, I do love that he's a young player under contract. His role grew throughout the year, right? Like there was clear projection and trajectory for what he is and what he could be. Some of these other
Mhm.
guys, the Zach Bond, it's like, well, he did get the contract extension, right? So we do like that. And it was one of the bigger linebacker contract extensions we've seen. So that gives me a little confidence. I don't know about first round confidence. I'm a little hesitant there personally. But I get it, right? I get the excitement. Uh, Caden Ellis is one that I was a big Caden Ellis supporter the last 2 years, had a lot of shares of him, so I really got the profit this last season. But again, 3-4, 3-6, that feels a little rich for me. Jamie and Sherwood, the fifth, sixth round, that feels about right for me for what he produced. He did limit himself in terms of some of the bigger play upside. He didn't have that, but he was consistent and he delivered, and now he's got what seems like a locked in role there as well. So to me, that jump
Mhm.
feels about right there, at least again in terms of my value and where these things sit. So I don't know. How about you? I mean, are you in on any of these guys? Are you buying this value where they're at? Are we are we snip snapping a little bit too much here?
Yeah, I think Bond going as early as he is a little concerning for me. I would be interested at 2-3. I'm probably not taking him in the first round. I mentioned I'm not just going to blindly take DL in the first round because I need that anchor DL. But if I'm thinking a first round linebacker, I'm still thinking more like a Fred Warner or a Roquan Smith. I think Zach Bond is great. I would take him in the second with pretty little reservation, especially in the mid second.
Yeah.
But that first round draft capital is always just so big. One thing I did want to ask you about those ranges that you were just talking about. I noticed Sherwood had the widest range in terms of where he's been drafted. Everyone else has been pretty close, but the two that you seem to have some sort of mixed feelings on where Ellis is going, and then sort of Sherwood because there's that range. So would you rather have Ellis at his floor? So if you were picking at 3-6,
Mhm.
would you be more comfortable taking Ellis at 3-6 or Sherwood at his ceiling? So Sherwood at 4-2. Which feels like more of a pick that Jake would feel comfortable with?
In big three scoring, I feel like I'd probably still end up leaning into Caden Ellis then. And that might be some of my previous bias, but I really do love his pass rush upside. That was one of the reasons I bought into him coming out of New Orleans into Atlanta 2 years ago. So I'd probably go that way, just kind of on the spot gut reaction here, but it's close. It's definitely close for me. If one of them was dual Desi, that would tip my favor.
If one of them was dual Desi, we would know the system is completely and fully broken. So it's probably a good thing that they aren't. But no, I just thought that was interesting because Sherwood does have that widest range. I think we know pretty much what we're gonna get from Sherwood. So to me, he's a little bit of a safer play. I still like Ellis. I like him. Granted, his ceiling and his floor are only 2 picks apart. So I would take Ellis probably a little bit later than that. Definitely Ellis at his floor versus Sherwood at his floor. I would be taking Sherwood at 6-7, but
Yeah.
that wasn't the problem I posed to you. I was like, all right, no, if you had to deal with one at their floor and one at their ceiling, which would it be? So, I think the other thing that I like to look at with these linebackers is those players who had breakouts but also had injuries to see what's happening with them. And I think the data is showing us a lot wider range of outcomes. And some of that is being driven by me, as I have drafted both of these guys in one or both of the IDP only best ball drafts. So, those two players that I wanted to talk about were Nakobe Dean and DeMarvion Overshone. Now, Dean has gone as high as 5-7 and as late as 9-3. We know that he had that very late season injury. We don't know when he'll be back. It seems with him a much more a matter of when than if. With Overshone, I know there is some speculation that it might be after Thanksgiving or the season might be a loss just because of the nature of his injury versus the nature of Dean's injury. But he did just take that number 0, so it seems like he is thinking about the season. Whenever I saw there's breaking news about Overshone, I'm like, oh, awesome. Do we have an injury? It's like, no, he changed his number. Okay, well, I'll take that as a positive sign, I suppose. But Overshown's range is 14.10 to 21.9. And I will fully disclose that that 14.10 was the most recent draft, and it was Vacation Scott that did that in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, late at night. So, with the benefit of hindsight and a time machine, I probably would have waited and picked somebody else instead. That's probably a little rich for Overshown. But I know these were my guys that I wanted to talk about. But Jake, I'm curious what you think. Overshown definitely has more risk associated with him about when he'll actually play for you. But both of these guys have just tremendous upside that we were able to see from their breakouts in 24 before they got hurt. What are you thinking? Are you just staying away from guys like this? Do either of these draft positions ranges feel like there could be some value there? What is your thought on these two?
Yeah, I think my general practice is I'm staying away from people with lower body injuries, significant ones towards the end of the season when it comes to these things. However, I think when you look at that 21 range for Overshown, at that point, I mean, you're taking dart throws, or you're just building out your DB squad really at that point for rotational purposes or hopes to fill out your bench throughout the rest of the year. Um, that's a perfect range for that, right? I mean, I'm even comfortable in the 18-19 range for him because again, if we can assume if he comes back uh, in November and then he ends up playing, really only 3-4 games at full strength, he still can do so many great things, right? That it's worth even a smaller
Mm-hmm.
subset of what he can deliver especially at the price you're paying there. Now, Dean, even at 9-3, that's that still feels a little rich for me, right? Like I still feel like I'm getting quality defensive linemen at that point if I've been able to hammer enough linebackers that I don't know that I'm really comfortable doing it there. So if once we reach the point of the off season too, where we've seen the NFL draft, if the Eagles do nothing to invest in that linebacking room, okay, well then I feel a little more
Mm-hmm.
confident, right? Because they clearly have a little bit of confidence in what's coming here down the pipeline for them in the rest of the off season. But right now, we're not working with enough information for me to feel strongly about that or to confidently move in that direction.
Yeah, so I am both of the deans, and what I'm hearing is you don't like my pick at 9.3, and you absolutely hate my pick of him at 5.7. But I'll take it. If he ends up playing the whole season, we'll see who gets the last laugh. But no, I totally get it's a risk profile thing. It's a roster composition thing. And apologies if you've heard some dings in the background, but we're doing drafts right now, so we have drafts going on, and Sleeper is people are making picks in the 21st round of the IDP only best ball 2 that we're doing currently. But when you look at some guys with Overshown, you're talking about players going in the 21st round. It really is a lot uh, of a bigger upside swing with Overshown. The linebackers that are available are guys like Christian Ellis and Malik Harrison. So it's backups, and it's guys with giant question marks about not only if they're going to see the field, but if they see the field, if they can actually do anything. Whereas
Right.
Overshown is more of a, if he sees the field, we know what he can do. And even if it's that kind of worst case post Thanksgiving, we know what he can do for you in that final push as you're working towards the end of the season and trying to ramp up some of those boosts when unfortunately other players are going to be going down with injuries as the season has that wear and tear and grind on players.
That's just like we talked about that in our first episode where this is where in the ninth round, right, or the eighth round, that's when you can start to extract some value. And sometimes extracting that value means taking some risks, right? Because now once we know more about the Eagles linebacking room, people might be willing to take Dean in the seventh or eighth, and at that point, well, now you've already extracted that value in the ninth round. So I mean, sometimes it's good to be the first one there, but sometimes I'll let someone else be the first person there. In this case, that can be you, Scott.
But another thing that Josh and I talked about, which was a D up conversation, but really has ramifications across the IDP landscape, and that is what to do with defensive backs. Now we have Mr. Late Round DB here with us tonight. So I have a feeling I know what direction this is going to go. But when you look at how these drafts have been playing out early in the offseason, are the DBs late enough or too early or just right? What is your overall take on the DB situation in these early drafts?
So for me, it's definitely too rich for my blood, right? There's some DBs I love. Brian
Mhm.
Branch is definitely one of them. I was a big fan of his coming into to the NFL. He's actually gone 312 in both of our IDP only best ball drafts so far, and that is is not a price tag I'm willing to pay up for at this point in time. That said, now some of the next DBs didn't start going until into the fifth round, so if I were to get spicy and try something different, I think that's where I would start to feel a little bit of comfort with that. That fifth, sixth, maybe even seventh round range is probably more for me. But again, when we talk about where we are in the off season, right? Like we have so much knowledge that we're working with, and there's so many variables in play that we're trying to understand. That when we get closer to about that 12th round, that's where I'm like, okay, we've really locked in a lot of our defensive talent. We've locked in pretty much all of our linebacker talent by that point across the draft board. That's when I'm really starting to take some shots on some guys that I think have some good upside in terms of defensive backs. And I'll hammer that next, 5 to 8 picks straight, just going through guys there. And unless you can find some good defensive line talent that seems to be slipping all of a sudden, and it's usually your guys, Scott, that end up slipping. It's those big guys in the middle who just don't get enough love sometimes. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
but those are the guys where you can start to see them slipping there, and I'll sprinkle one or two of those in if that works out. But um, you're starting four defensive backs still. You have flex positions that a big week from a defensive back can get them into your IDP flex just as easily too sometimes. So I like to build out a really strong stable of my defensive backs in that range, and then from there I just try to find whatever value is remaining, because maybe I'll get cute once in a while and I'll take a Willie Gay in Miami, right? Like maybe somehow he sees the field ahead of these guys, or the injury happens, or if there's a really strong handcuff at linebacker, like I just know that whomever EJ Speed is the next guy up in Houston, right? Like then I'll go ahead and I'll try to pick him or others. So um, I think they're about where they should be, in my opinion. I don't know. I'll never be the guy drafting them early. So I miss out on all the fun DBs, but that's all right. I still like my roster construction at the end of the day.
Hey, but you said you might get spicy one of these times and take some DBs early and try something different. So that's yet another reason to draft with us. You might end up in Jake's spicy draft where he's just taking DB early and often and just really hammering it. And it might be best ball three, which Harms is filling now, and we'll both be in, I'm sure, and be promoting for you to draft with us. So another reason for you to hop in and do some of that with us. But I am also a very late DB drafter. Sometimes I get too cute in the current best ball we're doing now. I didn't start drafting any DBs until round 18. And so now I'm going to have a team of entirely corners. Like the safeties are gone. I got Amani Hooker in the 18th, and then the safeties were just gone. So I'm going to be hammering corners probably the entirety of the rest of the draft because of how much variability there is there. But the other thing related to DBs that I've been paying close attention to, because this is something that's near and dear to my heart, are those DBs that are also returners. Given the changes in the kick return rule last year, we thought there was going to be this massive increase in kick returns. And so we thought the value of some players was going to jump significantly. We saw some of the increase. It didn't really end up panning out in a huge way, but we see another change this offseason to further increase the likelihood of more kick returns. Punt returns have stayed pretty vanilla for a long time, but still, it's a nice upside for some players. So when we look at those returners that are also DBs, Kayshawn Nixon is the name that always comes up for good reason. He was DB2 in Big Three scoring last year, largely on the value of those return yards. 20% of his total fantasy points from 2024 were from return yards. So you're really baking that in a lot if you are going to be drafting him highly again. The problem is he came out in January and said, I don't want to return kicks anymore. I think of myself as a CB1, and CB1s do not return kicks. I'm paraphrasing there. But I was curious to see how much that would shake the market for him. The guy who was just DB2 in the scoring settings last year is now going between DB10 and DB17. So in best ball 1, he went at 9.4. In best ball 2, he went at 14.3. I think 14.3, I'm a lot more comfortable with. I would not be looking at him whatsoever in the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, because I'm like you. If I'm taking someone in the 12th, I want it to be a relatively sure thing to build up some variability. And I think Nixon is a good corner. And, he played a good bit of slot corner as well in the past, which we know is a sweet spot for some IDP scoring. But the fact that 20% of his points came from kick returns, he said it's something he's not interested, and the team just brought in Kohlhagen, who has a lot of kick return upside. I think I'm going to be holding off on him. Cooper DeJean is another guy that we saw what he did in college at Iowa. We're curious how that would translate into the NFL. He had some great punt returns, didn't do any kick returning. I haven't seen any rumors that he's going to start kick returning. So I think baking in that little bit of upside with him as a punt returner is fine because he has good regular IDP upside. When we look at where he's going in the market right now, he was DB9, so just one DB ahead of Nixon in best ball 1, and DB10 in best ball 2. I think that might be a little rich for me. I just have a lot of concern about taking corners that early in the DB market in general. I like DeJean. I have him in Dynasty, so I'm hopeful that these things are going to work out. But and honestly, the apprehension here isn't as much thinking that the return yards are going to go down as much as it is, he has room to grow, obviously, but jumping him up to the DB9, the DB10 just feels like we might be projecting too much of a leap unless, something big is happening that I don't know about. This has been a bunch of fun. I'm really glad that we were able to get back together. Come draft with us. It's always fun. These are always only $5 contests, so it's low stakes. The only reason there's even a little bit of skin in the game is to help us build out some good ADP because you're going to pay a little bit more attention and put a little more thought into your picks. But we love drafting. We love drafting with all of you, and we love talking about drafting. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about drafting around the draft. So we're going to be talking about rookies. Our next episode will be coming out during draft week. And so while there's going to be a lot of emphasis on rookie dynasty value and landing spots and these wonderful conversations that we need to have, we also need to talk about what do we do with these guys in terms of their 2025 outlook? Where do we start to slot them in terms of these best balls? Because there's a different risk profile for a rookie than some other players. How do we think about these guys in terms of redraft? Where when you take them in redraft, you're locking them into a roster position and starting them at the expense of somebody else and not just having them as a potential flyer. So we'll talk about those in our next episode. It'll be a lot of fun to talk about how to handle those rookies in your upcoming IDP drafts, be they redraft or best ball. And until then, we'll see you in the drafts.